can post your questions as the session progresses. On the right-hand side of the screen, you can find a live Q&A link. Please post all your questions there. They will be taken by the speakers at the end of the session. Speaking about the session, right now we are in a transitional stage where digital is said to be the future and everyone is focusing their energies in that direction. So here we have a session on business models in post-COVID world, which discusses about ideas and innovations for news media companies to replicate the success of print in the digital world. With us is Mr. Krishna Prasad, former Editor-in-Chief, Outlook India, and Mr. Nitin Chandalia, Managing Director and Partner, Boston Consulting Group, India. About Mr. Krishna Prasad, he is former Editor-in-Chief of Outlook and a former member of the Press Council of India. In his 34-year career, Mr. Krishna Prasad has worked in 4 cities, edited 2 newspapers, and taught journalism in 3 continents. Currently, adjunct faculty at the Asian College of Journalism, where he teaches social media. He publishes the critically acclaimed media blog IJR and hosts the journalism podcast JPod. I welcome Mr. Krishna Prasad to join us as well as to introduce Mr. Nitin. Welcome, Mr. Krishna Prasad.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. And good afternoon, everybody. It's great to join you, all of you, online via Zoom. If journalism is the first draft of history, surely literature must be the first edition of the future. 160 years ago, Charles Dickens situated a book called A Tale of Two Cities in 2 cities, London and Paris. Among other things, he said it was the best of times and the worst of times, the season of light and the season of darkness, the spring of hope and the winter of despair. By talking of both possibilities, Charles Dickens was underlining the essential magic of life. But 8 months into COVID-19, it's not just 2 cities, but it's the whole world. It's not just one industry, but every sector of this world which has been hit. And for many of us in the news media business, the light is just not visible at the end of the tunnel. In fact, for many, the skyline has positively darkened in the last few weeks and months. Jobs have been lost, salaries have been slashed, editions have been proved, and so on. But it would be a mistake to put all the media eggs in the COVID basket. Things were bad for the media even before the pandemic. We were facing a downturn in the economy. An explosion in digital media had taken away readers and advertisers. A falling rupee was making newsprint imports costlier. And there were taxes and GST and so on we had to deal with, which were impacting bottom lines. That situation, the pre-COVID situation, is what has been exacerbated furthermore by COVID. And as the chairman of a large media company told me a few months ago, the media now has a pre-COVID era and a post-COVID era. It's not just one post-COVID era. And not surprisingly, everyone is scrambling to make sense of the emerging situation. Even before COVID happened upon us, the 2 most commonly used words in newsrooms and boardrooms was business model. Today, it is even more so, the word business model, the phrase business model. And COVID, in a sense, has been a truly secular disease for the media industry in the sense that it's affected virtually everybody, big and small, English and non-English, in the metropolitan cities and in the small towns. But the big difference is that in the past, we could do something, we could hope to do something to expect things to improve. But with the Indian economy tanking, with all its traditional advertisers like automotive and or online retailers and construction and education and travel and hospitality, with all our traditional media advertisers also hit by the same virus, their businesses are down too. So what can the media do to keep its nose above the surging waters? To shine some light on our dark corner, we have with us at the Indian Media Leaders E-Summit today, Mr. Nitin Chandalia. Mr. Chandalia is the Managing Director and Partner at Boston Consulting Group in India and was previously with Ernst & Young, which is now known as EY. As the news media gets squeezed on every front, hopefully Nitin will offer us his wisdom on how to accelerate revenue and how to improve margins, because that's the one thing which is in every media leader's head. Over to you, Nitin, and you have the next 12 to 15 minutes to throw light for all of us and to show us the light, really.
Sure. Thank you, Mr. Krishna Prasad, and good afternoon, everyone. That's a very, very tall ask you have placed on me, Mr. Krishna. I will, it's been a tough question as you laid out. There is, even before COVID, Indian news media and news media globally was already going through a challenging time. COVID has sort of exacerbated this entire situation and actually made it really worse. The time to act, essentially, if we thought was longer, has now actually almost got reduced to no time. What I will do, or what I will attempt to do, is actually share with you. I have a set of slides. Will not take a lot of time, but some perspectives around how we've seen the media evolve over the last few years in terms of spend. Touch upon digital. And then towards the end, I'll leave you with some ideas, thoughts that we have as a firm globally on how the news media publishing industry should look to reinvent the business model for continuing to survive and continuing to be profitable while also serving the cause of journalism, which the whole news media industry has been about. So just allow me a second for me to share my screen. Okay, so if you look at how media, and I will not, I have some data slides, I will not spend a lot of time or not pause there, but if you see how the overall media spend has been over the last, decade plus, it's grown at about 4%. If you look at the last 10 years, which is just post the financial crisis, it's been about 5.5% increase. Print, all this while has had a declining market with, between 8 to 10%, declining overall revenues globally, right? The market, if you look at how the forecast was pre-COVID, pretty much almost an extension of how it's been in the past. Print was expected to decline by 9%, while digital display was declining, but digital overall was, expected to grow significantly. Now, this growth over the last few years, it's interesting, and last few years in the projections, I just want to call out a couple of things. Majority of the 5% or so growth that you've seen actually comes through because digital has been growing significantly. TV has been flat, while print has been declining. Also, from a market perspective, emerging markets, especially China, have driven a lot of the global growth. But, most of the developed markets in developing economies have continued to stay flat. Right? What does it mean? If actually how does one read the whole COVID crisis and the impact? Thought it would be useful to go and see what happened to the overall media spend in the aftermath of the global financial crisis. So if you see this chart, overall, there is a high degree of correlation between GDP growth and advertising growth. As we all sort of have heard, read, talked about, advertising spend is directly linked to how the economy is doing. In the aftermath of the financial crisis, spend across categories had come down. However, digital was the first one to sort of very quickly come up the curve. Print print suffered, radio suffered, and have continued to sort of, decline ever since over the last 10 to 12 years. As one looks at the situation today and future forward, the current forecast, and we hope it should be better, but the three categories that we believe will take a significant hit going forward, almost a structural change in spend, is the news media, the publishing business. Also radio globally, we expect that to take a hit and it'll take a long time to recover. It may just stay flat to marginally negative. And finally, TV as well. The linear TV could continue to see a lot of pressure on the advertising side. So these three categories overall, will continue to be under pressure. Print, the most of all. In this time, if you see how the total media consumption has changed, again, we'll look at about last 10 years, and this is not looking at, it's pre-COVID, right? in terms of time spent on digital consumption, which is the chart on your left, has gone up by about 10%, while the overall share of spend has shifted a lot more towards digital. Print and radio have both continued to decline in terms of their overall spend as well as the consumption. And this trend that you see both on the consumption side as well as the ad spend side is what we see likely to continue. And the step shift that we've seen in the last quarter and a half, could almost become the new baseline. If you look at current full calendar year, that could become, or the exit of Q4 of this year could become the new baseline for print as one moves forward in the next year. One other element which is again important to look at, and many of you who are sort of in the media space, overall ad budgets have come down. Print and linear TV had gone down by more than 40 to 50% to start with. It started to come back as the economy has opened up. These numbers were sort of from the earlier the first couple of months, but the sectors which contribute significantly to print spend continue to struggle. So whether it's travel, tourism, media, entertainment, restaurant, retail, these sectors continue to be under pressure. Auto is starting to come back from a sales perspective, but I think the entire industry is sort of in a wait and watch mode whether the demand that has come back up will sustain or not, which directly has implications for how the advertising spend moves. And this one's an interesting chart. Again, when we looked at how for the overall newspaper industry, what is the source of revenue globally? About a third of the revenues come from advertising, while in India this is almost 2/3 come from advertising and 1/3 from consumers. Now that puts the Indian media industry in a more of a critical position, because for continuing to grow and continuing to operate profitably, the subscriber revenue or the consumer or the reader revenue is not enough, and one still has significantly higher reliance on advertising spend. And that's where the conversation on what should be some of the ideas for the future to look at to drive or to at least have an operating model where one continues to operate profitably. And one thing that we have been seeing globally overall, consumers are more willing to purchase content. And this page talks about different examples, not just news media. The news publishing side is on the right-hand side, corner at the top. But, whether it is about music, whether it's about OTT video, whether it's about pay TV, and, some examples in publishing, consumers have shown appetite to actually pay for content. And wherever that has happened, that is through differentiated content, which is driven and which is led by a point of view with something unique and offering a perspective to the reader, if I just talk about the publishing example. And many of the publications actually talk to a segment and appeal to a segment of customers, segments of customers and readers, and have built their own reader base, which in many of the cases, the online reader base has been somewhat different, while overlapping has led to new subscribers, which were actually not otherwise readers of newspapers as well. We've talked about that. Overall, while the advertising spend has been at a challenge, there are 3 or 4 key themes that we are continuing to see. One, there is an increased shift of dollars from general marketing spend towards more targeted performance-driven marketing. There is the other part where companies are looking at, many of the companies which were not traditionally e-commerce focused have all now started and invested significantly in e-commerce channels, and there is appetite to spend to market and advertise for these e-commerce channels. Companies are carefully looking at the entire advertising budget, so optimizing spends, wherever the costs are higher, rationalizing those costs and moving more towards targeted advertising. And finally, companies are saving on budgets, or at least thinking that as in one rebound comes in, they will want to have some budgets with them to be able to spend so that they are prepared for the rebound as and when that happens and comes through, so that they are able to then capture a larger share of the market as the economy turns. So it's not that advertising dollars have completely sort of moved away or dried up. There is a cautious approach. There is more focus on reducing those costs which have lower ROI and a significantly higher focus on performance marketing. Now, with this context, how do news media players come in, right? And we'll just get to that. I think the one thing I wanted to give you is we expect digital in India to grow significantly. Now, the numbers we have, there are all kinds of projections that everybody talks about significantly higher growth. Our expectation is that the industry should more than double, almost get to 3x in the next 5 years. And again, COVID will only fasten the pace of this change, right? Most news media players also operate in digital, but the size of digital businesses for most is fairly small. I think the one thing that everybody, each of the players has to look at is how do you drive digital up, and the digital part of the revenues up, across different formats. And this brings me to the sort of last part of the conversation to say, as one looks at the business model going forward, what are the set of things to think about, right? And there are 7 sort of points I've laid out here, and in no order of importance, but it's one way to think about as a company, as a company which is operating 1-2 years from now, with an operating model which is profitable. How does one approach the overall business? The first and foremost is to put your audience first. Put the reader first. I can dare say that over the last several years, the lure of advertising dollars have been, very, very powerful to shift a bit of focus from content, shift a bit of focus from being unique or differentiated in content. And I think the time is now there to actually make sure that you put the audience first, put the reader first, because reader, one view for us, at least one global view that we hold is, you need to get to almost a point of view where, almost a business where 75% of your revenues come from subscribers and readers. If that's the business that one has to move to eventually, you will have to put the reader first. The second is transforming ad sales organization. Media sales organizations have worked in a very different format. They were, the decade which was 2000 to 2005 to 15, I would say, where ad growth was just coming in. Advertising sales didn't really, it didn't really need to be sold. Advertisers used to come knocking at the door with ad spends. That changed over the last 3 to 4 years, and now it has changed even more significantly. Now, how does one think about ad sales in the new era? Is it about, and again, just like audience here, to the advertiser who is the stakeholder, how do you create products that you can take to them, drive more outcome-oriented pricing, and selectively target those kind of players or those companies for whom you can actually create a product that they would buy from you rather than just a display advertising, on a printed newspaper. The third one is investing in a marketing tech stack. Many global players, in the move towards getting to performance marketing, have actually invested in creating digital assets and capabilities to help them sort of leverage on not just the print reach, but also the reach of the digital business to help drive performance-driven marketing and performance-driven advertising solutions. For India as well, India is at the cusp, no longer sort of right to say the cusp, but at the digital transformation stage where I think the consumption of digital is only going to go up, at least for the next few years. It is the right time to invest in marketing tech solutions to build upon the digital presence that one has, right? Finally, the fourth example is about alliances, especially as one looks to compete in the digital area. As we all know, Google and Facebook are two sort of really large gorillas in the digital marketing space and digital space. And everybody else is really a minor player. How do you compete in this space? There are some examples, and there've been a lot of talk about creating alliances, joint go-to-market, creating a platform where publishers could come together, offer the inventory, so that you actually are able to get a better price. There have been many failed attempts, but I think time is now ripe, and there are some examples I can talk through. One in Europe, which is now publishers have come together to offer inventory to market, and the reach is almost equal to Google or Facebook, right? So you become a credible player and large players that advertisers will take seriously and come to you directly if an alliance of that kind can be put. Cost optimization, I will not talk about. It's been a focus for the industry over the last 3 to 4 years. It becomes even more critical right now. One cannot afford to run with the kind of cost models and the operating cost that were used to run earlier. And I would say the only point I want to call out here is the cost optimization can't just be incremental. One has to just rethink the entire cost structure, almost do a zero-based budgeting kind of exercise, saying, if here is the kind of readers I want to reach, here are the people I'm going to cater to, what is the leanest organization I need, and not start from where I am today, but to say, what do I need for future? And almost keep that part of the organization, and the rest, one has to look at the cost. Accelerate to consumer pay models, a topic which has been in discussions. Many players have tried this. How do you get the model right where you get the subscribers to pay? In India, we are not really, none of the readers would like to pay for content for Indian news media. At the same time, I know many people who actually pay for a New York Times subscription. But when will the tipping point come where you can actually have consumers pay for it? And finally, leveraging analytics to differentiate whether it's especially as far as your digital products are concerned. How do you make news most relevant for people? How do you make sure you are able to drive engagement, whether it's through app, through through just the website, and so on. So we'll leave these with these sort of 7-point agenda or 7-point element for the future operating model. And if there are any questions specifically on on these or otherwise, we'll be happy to take that. I will limit the PowerPoint slides and would love to engage in some conversation.
Yeah, super. Nitin, let me just come to a few questions which are up front in my mind as we speak. I'm sure most of the participants will be able to go and look up these slides, I presume, later on the website.
Sure, absolutely.
So let's go through a couple of straightforward questions that I have in mind, and they are related, more actionable questions, really. You have worked with media outlets, and I would appreciate very short answers because we are running out of time. You work with media players and so on. What is the question most media outlets or executives are asking you just now? And what is your answer to that? What is the single biggest question?
No, the single biggest question is, which used to be, so let me say, there were two parts. One is, how long do I have before I face the cliff, right? And what will be the cliff like? That used to be the question over the last 2 to 3 years. When will this revenue suddenly drop? Now the question of cliff, almost everybody has accepted. It's like wake up and smell the coffee, it's here, right? Yeah. The point is, what is the future operating model that I need to get to? And within that, and there are only two parts. One, how should I plan for my revenue mix going forward? Is it still going to be 2/3 advertising or 70% advertising, 30% readership? Or it's going to change the other way, and how do I get there? I think that's the biggest question, because for people have realized that so that's what. And the second is, how does one look at digital, growing digital, and competing with with the likes of Facebook and Google?
What is this most striking model of innovation you have heard of or seen since this pandemic broke, which media participants could use?
Since this pandemic broke, okay, I wouldn't have examples in India, unfortunately, but globally, if I look at how somebody like a Gannett has responded, they have increased their focus on digital significantly, while they've continued to sort of push news, publish news, in the same manner, but the focus on digital has completely shifted. They have even, in terms of how the sales force was structured and incentivized, the entire focus just shifted to digital first versus, and print later. It'll be fair to say that they were already on a journey, but, the switch for them while they were waiting to change the path, actually COVID forced that.
Let's look at this from the outside. You also work as BCG. You work with other clients, not just media. I presume you work with technology, as you've said. What is the one key lesson for the media industry that media executives and outlets could take from tech companies? What is that one lesson tech has learned which media could use?
Sure. Look, I think it's about the one element that if I consider, how tech and especially the consumer tech companies operate, right? Consumer is at the center of everything. Unfortunately for news media, the reader has not been at the center. If you see, there has been limited differentiation across the different products that are available, right? Everybody will say that I have, there is some differentiation. But if I were to look at some of the products available outside, there is clearly a differentiation, and depending on whether I like to read something or not, whether you pick up a New York Times or whether you look at Washington Post, you know what they stand for, right? And if you read something, this is what you will get versus not. So I think just putting the reader at the center, which is how technology companies have actually grown and continue to focus on, which is just, almost like a segment of one to say, here is one reader that I need to influence, and I need to make sure that the reader spends more time on my website or my product, and I am able to influence. And, and some of the similarly, if I do get an example, people have started to think of novel ways to push the right set of articles to you, whether it's digital or, whether it's digital platforms, right? It's not based on what your browsing history is, but it could be based on a survey that you participated in, right? And you then get the right pop. So as a reader, I get a sense that I'm getting content which is almost curated for me, and something which is of my interest. And that's one thing that, news media companies especially will need to look at as far as I'm concerned.
Every media house, this is a triple barrel question. I'm including a couple of participants here. Karna Keshav and K.S. Hariharan are also included in this question. Every media house talks of digital as the future. Every consultant talks of digital as the future. But does this model suit everybody, in urban markets, upcountry markets, English, language? And is this model sustainable for everybody? Because the question Karna Keshav asks is that Indian consumers don't pay for content while they are able to pay for apps and so on and so forth. Likewise, Mr. Hariharan talks of how 70% of all digital revenues or even more than that go away to Google and Facebook. So how sustainable is it to be just talking of this digital model? Even in that last slide of yours, Indian media seems to have done 6 of the 7 that you mentioned, except one thing, which is investing in marketing technology. That's the third slide, which they have not done. So the point is, does this model fit everybody or what?
So,
very quickly, we don't have too much time. Very quickly,
I know we don't have time, and this is something I have debated and discussed with sort of many of my clients. And the challenge has been, so 2 points I would make. One, when you say Indian media has done everything, I don't think we have done it wholeheartedly.
Sure.
Digital has been, a small business unit, somebody being hired, a set of people to build the website, sell the ads. That's not digital first. You have to make digital first, right? And whether it's content, whether it's ad sales, it has to be digital first. The second, sooner or later, it has to happen. I think COVID has almost brought that later point, upfront to sooner. While news media circulation will be back, unless one can fundamentally change the revenue mix and have a much higher reader portion to the overall revenues, whether it is through digital or people paying for the hard copy newspaper, subscribers will have to pay more. And I think that's one reality we should all embrace. And companies which will be able to get to that point faster will be the ones who will be able to operate profitably. Right, and survive not just the pandemic, but I think over a longer run.
Well, one final question. You mentioned that this whole thing is linked to the economy. And as we've seen, the Indian economy is not doing very well. It's going southwards. So what should media companies now be prioritizing on? Content creation, distribution, monetization? One word answer. I think we've lost Nitin. Yeah,
No,
Nitin,
I'm
please.
here. So yeah, I think content is the key. Content is the most important while managing costs, because like any downturn, it's extremely important to be able to operate, conserve cash, but you can't afford to lose your readers. So content is critical. But one has to look at, more optimal and lower cost options of content, which are still better quality.
Super. Well, in 1988, Andy Grove of Intel wrote a book saying that only the paranoid survive, in which he floated the whole idea of a strategic inflection point, and I think we've reached that point. So thank you very much, Nitin Chandalia of Boston Consulting Group, for your insight. Hopefully, media leaders have been able to suss out something useful from your experience and from your thoughts. And thank you all very much for joining us in this conversation. Thank you, Nitin.
Thank you, Mr. Krishna Prasad, and thank you, Mr. Nitin. That was yet another wonderful session. Now I request the audience to please go back to your timeline and join us for the next session.